Hi, my name is Nick Holliday, and this is my story. Well, my dad, and my earliest memories of my dad go all the way back to, I can remember some when I was 2. And he struggled with depression, alcohol, drug abuse. I mean, it was across the board. At the same time, I have a copy of his journal, and you can see in there's the heart of a guy that wants to be better, and he wants to be well, but he's got all these demons that he's fighting. And so, but being addicted to alcohol and constantly fighting that depression in bad ways. And so some of my earliest memories of him, I got some good ones of him and I wrestling and doing fun stuff like that. But I also remember him and my mom fighting and screaming at each other. And I remember him yelling at me too about, little things. In one particular instance, he was watching me and he wanted to go to a bar. And so I remember I was about 2, maybe early 3s, and he took me to a bar, and I talked to the bartender while he got some drinks. And so it was just, that was life, beginning off. When you're that young, I had nothing to compare it to. You knew it didn't make you feel good inside, and you pick up on your parents' response, and I saw how it stressed my mom out. I know how my dad could make me feel, and it's it's your dad, and you love them no matter what. But then you're confused when you would spill a glass of milk and he would go ballistic on you, and so it was a constant back and forth. But having nothing to compare it to, and you're so young, you just don't have a concept. My dad's whole life, he struggled with mental illness as well. And his dad, more or less just kind of pushed him to the curb and didn't really want anything to do with him. He was an embarrassment to the family. So I think my dad struggled with a lot of that. He was a very smart man, but I think that rejection coupled with mental illness and either the unwillingness or the inability to make good decisions left him to try to cope with it the best he knew how, and he found his best coping mechanism at the bottom of a bottle. A lot of the manifestations of the mental illness I hear about from my mom. I don't remember too much of that, but what I do remember her telling me, he would just have episodes where he would just be it would almost be like he'd be in another world and just be acting out and doing and saying bizarre things. Hallucinations were very common for him. I think in a sense I'm blessed to not remember so much of that nightmare, but I have heard parts of stories like that from my mom, and just, she was married to him for about 10 years, and it was, that was her day-to-day, and that's what she had to deal with. I remember that day really clearly. I was 3, and I kind of had my own routine. Typically in the mornings I would grab my pillow and my blanket and my blankie, and I would walk downstairs, and then, if nobody was up yet, I was in the bad habit of getting on top of the counter, getting into the sugar bowl and just hamming it. It was great. That was my thing, and my dad let me do it. So, and typically my mom would go to work and dad would stay home with me. On this particular morning, I remember coming down the stairs, and it's so weird because I can see it like yesterday. I don't have a memory even to this day that is more clear than this one, but I remember stopping on the landing towards the bottom of our stairs, and I remember looking into our den, which is where my dad slept, and I remember just looking in, and my mom was in there, and I just saw his body just laying there. And my mom told me she was getting ready to leave for work that day, and she, called out his name and said, "I'm leaving for work," and he didn't respond, and she almost just walked out the door. And she said, I had also been in the habit of coming downstairs and snuggling up with him on the couch, and so she, having heard from him, she doubled back, went back inside, and then found him there dead, and it was pretty obvious he had been dead for several hours. I just remember that day was chaotic. I remember my mom taking me over to a neighbor's house. I remember wanting to stay because I didn't want to miss the angels coming to take my dad to heaven. And where I got that idea, I'm still not sure where that came from, but just being 3, you're just totally innocent. And I remember coming back to the house later, and some local pastor was there. I didn't recognize him, but he was talking to me, and I remember him saying something about, your dad has died. And I remember my mom trying to communicate that to me, and that word just didn't make sense to me. Just died, like what, death? I didn't understand that he was never going to be there again, that we weren't going to get to wrestle again. But I knew something huge had just happened. It was a very chaotic day. And then I remember too then his funeral, which I think might have been the next day. And there's actually a picture of me, and I remember this too, standing over my dad's casket and just staring at his face. And it was, there's a picture of me, you know, standing there, and it's just, again, it's just surreal. And you know, a son that young should never have to see the body of his dad like that. That's so messed up. So, and looking back on that now, it makes me, being a dad now myself, that gets me every time. I never want my son to have to experience that. After that, my mom was really good about getting me connected with men of faith. So at church, she would make sure that there was, you know, maybe some dad that she saw that could speak into my life or whatever. I remember just I was maybe within that year, my uncle took me on a fishing trip. And I remember thinking, like, why are we fishing? I've never gone fishing before in my life. What are we doing? But, you know, looking back, I see now that they were like, hey, my mom was smart and knew that, hey, we need to get this kid surrounded with a dad. And that's one of my mom's biggest regrets. While being married to him was a nightmare, her regret was that my son's gonna have to grow up without a dad. And so she did everything that she could. There was a verse from Psalms that she had etched on our wall after he passed away, that said, a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. And that was like our anthem verse as a family. And so even from a super young age, I give my mom all the credit for this, that I had this very bizarre, mature understanding that God was my dad. And that was awesome. And so that went on for a long time. There were moments where I would, you know, have questions, and my mom would tell me stories. She was always very open with me about who my dad was, his struggles, but that he loved me very much. When I started to become a teen, though, the reality really started setting in, and I started to see what I was missing. And so, you know, going through middle school for everybody is this, oh my gosh, it's a horrendous experience. But during that time, and especially as, you know, as I'm being an adolescent and I'm butting heads with my mom, I remember thinking, like, gosh, I wish I had a dad to talk to. I wish I had somebody like that. And that's when I started to feel this emptiness. And that's when I kind of almost started to lose that, you know, God is my dad, like everything's okay. And it was almost like, you know, reality started to set in for me that, like, wow, I really don't have a dad. And I really can't describe nothingness to you. And that's what it felt like. And that feeling got worse and worse and worse as time went on. And my mom did end up getting remarried halfway through high school, and he's a great guy. Really lucky to have him around. But as anybody who has been in a step family situation would tell you, that it doesn't make the void go away. And so again, just, it's one thing as a teen to struggle with something, but to struggle with nothing is completely, I mean, it's hard to even find the words to describe what that is like. And so I wouldn't describe myself as an angry kid, but there was always kind of this channel of unrest I felt, you know, deep inside of me. And as I've been going through stuff of my dad's, just reading different journal entries from him and seeing how he wanted to get better and he was trying, it breaks my heart now And there was a point even just a few months ago where I was kind of digging into his past a little bit. And I've actually been, his grave right now is unmarked. And so I've been trying to get around the paperwork and, getting enough money to do that, to mark that and kind of put some finality on it. And during that process, I got so frustrated, even as an adult. And I was kind of mad at my dad in my head, and it was just like, why would you make such a selfish decision and remove yourself from the equation like that? And to this day, it's so very unclear what really happened. We know that he overdosed on some of his prescription stuff. We're not 100% that it was suicide, but it was the day that my mom had told him that he needed to be out of the house. And so it's just very suspect. And he had dealt with suicidal tendencies and thoughts for his whole life, and he had tried many times before. So it was definitely in his MO. And so part of me is angry with him, and the other part of me loves him. So why would you take yourself out of that equation? But you're not here right now for me to be mad at you. And so I just kind of threw my hands up in the air, and it's, why would you do that to your son? And so I look at my 2-year-old son, and I can't imagine coming to a place in my life where I could say, I hate myself so much and I hate my family so much that I'm going to pull the plug on this whole deal, and I'm going to let my son figure life out by himself. And that's not just hate for yourself. You are literally saying, I care so little about the people around me that I'm going to do that. God's been good, and God's filled in the cracks as we've gone, and he has been an outstanding father to me. But earthly dads have a humongous role to play in that whole thing. That is never the answer. And I'm sitting here, 23 years later, and I'm still feeling the blows and the ramifications. And there are times when it moves me to tears to think about what could have been and what I'll never have now.